This podcast is brought to you by Business Radio, powered by Wharton, originally airing on SiriusXM.
Hey folks, welcome back. You're in the workplace. I'm Peter Cappelli.
I'm Dan O'Mara.
And we're talking in this half hour, we were talking about recruiters, and we're going to shift gears a little bit here and talk about the broad issues going on today. And with us to talk about this is Debbie Bolla, who is the editorial director and editor-in-chief of HRO Today magazine. Going to talk to us about what's in the news. Debbie, how you doing?
Hi, Peter. Hi, Dan. How you guys doing?
Hello there.
We're good. What are you working on this week? What's the hot story this month?
So our July-August issue just dropped, and back in May at our HRO Today forum, I was talking to a group of CHROs about what they wanted to see in the magazine.
Okay.
And one of the main topics that came up was securing employee data.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this has become quite a hot topic, and in our issue, we have a story called The Data Dilemma, because if you think about it, more and more companies are leveraging different technology programs that house employee data. A lot of it can be pretty confidential. But data also has the ability to provide a lot of insights on employee behaviors, skills, and productivity. So it works for HR.
Right.
But there's a big risk on relying on technology to keep the employee data safe.
Right.
And there are other risk factors, too, before you go on, is that, they're being accessed from different devices, because there's more and more these days. And, of course, there are remote employees who are working on different networks, which sometimes can be unsecured. So there's a couple risk factors at play here.
Yeah. And it looks like I was just looking at your story here, that roughly, doing the math here, about a quarter of data breaches are accidental and accidentally caused by somebody internal. But that means...
a bit more than that, yeah. So you get completely internal and accidental.
A bunch of them, the majority are not accidental, and some of those are internal. So what's going on there? It's not an accident, and the cause is internal. Are these people stealing the data? Somebody getting to them and saying, would you dump the data for us?
No, I honestly think it's just miscommunication on the employee part of what to do with their logins and their passwords.
Okay.
And just, HR really needs to step in and train employees to ensure that they know how to safeguard their data when they're using systems.
Okay. One of the things I thought was interesting in your story, Deb, is that companies have lots of information about people working for them who are not their employees as well. So contractors who are working for you and other sorts of folks there too. Yep. And that's kind of interesting. So let me ask our resident attorney to ponder that one for a minute. What are the issues for an employer with respect to a data breach where I lose or somebody comes past my firewall and takes employee information? And is it different, worse, if it's not an employee, somebody who works for us, not a customer?
I think if it's customer information, there's a whole very specific protocol mandated by federal law on giving notices. That's why these companies issue the notices probably as late as they can and carefully chosen words. But the companies often don't have to figure this out themselves because right now data breach insurance is very popular. A lot of companies getting it. I think CEOs saying this could be what saves my job. And data breach carriers in turn have law firms on retainer who do nothing but advise companies on data breaches. The person you're talking to probably does that. If not 24/7, that's all they do. And they know it pretty well. I don't, but...
And so I imagine in order to get the policy, they're going to come in and assess you and tell you what you have to do, or we're not going to insure you, right?
That would make sense. I'm not sure they do, but that would make sense.
Yeah. Debbie, I think you're on a really hot point here, a really important one, in this issue of how companies are going to respond to this. So quoting your article, one of the experts, I guess, was saying a good rule of thumb is to only collect and store the information you absolutely need and purge it when you don't need it. The complication with that in this new era of data science is that you need a ton of data to make this stuff work. For example, we're trying to build an algorithm on hiring, right? Well, to really build it well, you need information about the people you didn't hire as well as the people you did hire. And you'd need to have that information going back for quite a long period of time, or you can't build an algorithm that's going to be sensible, right? And this is true in decision after decision after decision about training, what to train people on, and performance management, all that kind of stuff. And yet the data breach advice is exactly the opposite, right?
But I think we need to take into account, I completely agree with that, and that's one of the things that big data is trying to do that we've talked about for years, is having a history. But do you really need Social Security numbers of employees that no longer work for your organization or personal confidential information? Right. And I think that's an onerous step to do, but important.
Debbie, let's move on to, we just got a couple minutes left, but maybe we can move quickly to your second story, the second fave here for this month.
Yeah, Peter, again, I always like to talk about talent and hiring. It's very important, obviously, to HR and the current low unemployment. So we'd like to cover some different approaches, and one of them is a temp-to-hire model that we're seeing kind of evolve as you are finding more gig workers and more organizations being more flexible in their hiring. So they kind of benefit both of them. So clearly, temp to hire means you would start in a contractor role or a project role. And if it was a good fit on both ends, you would eventually be hired.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And by the way, I did a survey with the census in 2001, so that's almost 20 years ago. And even then, about 2% of Americans got their jobs from temp to hire. Right, so 2%, small percent, but in the U.S., it's a big, big number. Dan, you see anything to worry about with respect to this? It sounds perfectly sensible. Try people out.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so perfectly sensible.
Although, depending on the wage rates and everything else, some employers would say, listen, what you get with temp to hire is unemployed people that you're looking at them for 6 weeks before you make a hiring decision. Okay, that makes sense, but maybe they want a different and higher caliber people than they perceive they'd get with unemployed people through temp to hire. Yeah. So just make a good job and hire on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But I can see where temp to hire, I've got a friend who has a manufacturing company, and he uses temp to hire all the time. It's basically what works best for him.
Yeah, it's a good point, Deb. I guess in this extremely tight labor market, is it harder to do temp for hire than it would have been a couple of years ago when lots of people were in the temp labor pool?
Well, it depends on your statistics in terms of the temp labor pool, because there are plenty of workers who are looking for gig work. So if it is satisfying and challenging and a good fit, there is some opportunity that they may want to take on the role full time.
But if they want to take on a full-time role, it's not gig, right? So
but they might want to move into it. So it's a way that the market is responding to an increase in gig workers by choice, highly specialized workers, perhaps IT engineering. But if it, one of the things the story recommends is treating these temps like full-time employees. So showing them your employer brand, reinforcing the culture, explaining some of your benefits, creating this great experience. So you may attract them into a full-time position.
Ooh, can I raise my junior lawyer merit badge hand?
Yes, you may.
And say, if these are contractors, you really shouldn't do that, right?
Well, but they aren't necessarily, if they're temporary employees, they are by definition not independent contractors. They're employees, but on a temporary basis. And frankly, I'm not sure that's all that different from the rest of us at-will employees, because everything's temporary, except you're even more temporary on thinner ice if you're a temp.
So do you have a sense of how much of this is going on, Deb?
I think it's starting to gain some momentum, but again, hiring is very challenging right now.
Yeah.
But it's giving HR the opportunity in certain positions to try before they buy, so it's working for them. And it also provides the opportunity to really find the skills that they may not be able to identify and understand during the interviewing process.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So you can see how a worker works in a team and their quality of work and if they can meet deadlines. Some of those things are really important.
Yeah, I think at the college and the high school level, this is what internships are about, right, is that you can check them out, they can check you out. Same sort of thing applies here. My guess, though, is I think this is sort of, Dan was saying this earlier, is that probably doesn't work that well for all levels of jobs. It probably works best, my guess is, for the lower level jobs where being able to see what people are like in the workplace is...
Do they show up sober?
Yeah, they show up lower bars to clear and easier to tell if they're clear. How are we doing on the sober front today, by the way, here in the studio? We all good?
0.0.
There we go. Deb, thanks very much for being with us. We'll see you again next month. And folks, we're going to take a break here, work on the sober thing. Be right back with you in just a minute.
For more insight from Business Radio, please visit businessradio.wharton.upenn.edu.